In July 2020, a young teacher called Tom Pirie underwent a mental health assessment which judged him to be at low risk of suicide. The following day, he took his own life.
Now Tom's dad, Philip, has launched a campaign backed by 3 of Britain's biggest mental health charities to overhaul the system for assessing suicide risk.
Well, Philip joins us now, along with Lisa Roxby from the suicide prevention charity Papyrus.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
And Philip, do you want to start by just telling us a bit about your son?
Yeah, sure. Tom was a lovely guy. He was popular, he was friendly, he was outgoing. He loved to travel. He was very good at languages. He was an independent sort of person, determined, sometimes very determined. And he wanted to help others. I think that was really a key thing about his personality. And he also had a passion for football. And a couple of his schoolmates last October organised a memorial football match for him, which was fantastic, and over 100 people turned up for it. It was a really touching occasion, actually.
Give us an idea of what happened to Tom, because there was an assessment, wasn't there, given, and was it right just the next day that he took his own life, is that right?
Yeah, he'd been seeing a counsellor, and he'd been assessed as low risk of suicide the day before he took his own life.
And that must be devastating for you to know that he was, sat in a chair with somebody who could have helped him, and that somehow the system didn't work.
I think what was really devastating was that initially I thought this was a rare occurrence, that Tom was just unlucky, one of the few who was assessed as low risk who went on to die by suicide. But the more I looked into it, the more I saw that it was actually a very common occurrence, so that of the 17 people who die every day by suicide in this country, 5 of them are in contact with mental health services, and 4 of those 5 are assessed as low or no risk of suicide at their last contact. That's 80% are assessed as low or no risk, and they go on to die by suicide.
Lisa, what's going on here then? Because this story sounds so familiar. Somebody who appears to be popular, successful, struggling perhaps with a mental health, but doing well and being assessed as being low risk. How is this happening?
At Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide, we hear stories such as Philip and Tom's every day, sadly, and our hearts go out to Philip and his family. We do hear that people are struggling, and that assessment that they have needs to be more rounded, so that the questions that they're faced with, there's more talk around what's making them feel the way they feel. Use the word suicide, ask them directly. Don't pussyfoot around and say, are you having dark thoughts? Because dark thoughts is a bit of a grey area. Ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? Sometimes when people are struggling in the way that you are, suicide becomes an option, and is that an option for you? So it's really encouraging clinicians to use that word and directly ask young people.
So as things stand, is it a sort of tick box assessment rather than being personalised to that individual? Because there's always a risk with that the clinician isn't fully engaging, they're just doing the paperwork.
That's right, and I think the clinicians are doing a good job in some cases, and it's happening where it works really, really well. But what we're asking for is a more holistic approach, so that the questions are asked around the tick boxing, and understand that person, sit with them, and don't try and fix them or assess them. Try and understand what is troubling them and what's causing them to feel low and to maybe have thoughts of suicide.
Do you think that approach might have helped Tom and some of the other people that you've been looking at as well?
I do. I mean, it was shocking to discover that there are some very, very crude and invalid checklists being used, commonly used by counsellors. And I'm not pointing the finger at any counsellor, it's a system problem. It really is a system problem. Counsellors do a difficult job, and they need to have tools that are fit for purpose. And a lot of the tools that they are taught are just not fit for purpose, and they've not been validated, and they need to be.
What would an example of that be then?
A typical checklist, one that Tom went through several times, is got 3 really simple questions. It's a very crude checklist. The first question is, do you have suicidal thoughts? The second question is, do you have suicidal intentions? And the third question is, do you have plans to die by suicide? And if the answer is yes, I have suicidal thoughts, no, I don't have any intentions, no, I don't have any plans, you are automatically classified as low risk.
Without any further probing?
Well, I know, I'm not sure what goes on in those counselling sessions, but I think the big risk is that the client gets the impression, you know, it's difficult to admit to suicidal thoughts for many people, especially young men, frankly. And the impression that that gives to the client is that they've been labelled and dismissed as low risk of suicide, and therefore it's a topic not to be explored and not to be gone into any further. And that is wrong. That's absolutely wrong.
It feels like, you know, it is a clinical process, but it feels almost like it's too clinical. But then it requires, I would imagine, more funding, more time, and I'm sure there's probably clinicians who are watching this, who've gone through, and counsellors who are watching this, who've gone through that process thinking, well, I've got to get through a certain number of assessments, or I don't have the time or the ability or enough staff to be able to do what you're asking me to do. Is that part of the problem with the process as well?
I think so, and suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK, and that's a shocking statistic. And understanding what we know is that individualised safety plans work really well when a person is struggling with thoughts of suicide, and what we do on our helpline, Hopeline UK, is work with the individual to empower them to understand what's bringing them to that point and help them keep themselves safe from suicide. So I think there's definitely an element of more time and support that's needed to get that person to a safe place.
And in terms of support, since Tom has sadly died, I mean, you talked about the friends of his who were organising the football tournament. Yeah. How much support have you as a family received, and I suppose been able to welcome from friends and family as well?
Yeah, I think for me one of the really positive experiences, you know, which there've been some very dark and lonely days since Tom died, but I've been able to get the support from friends and family, and I've made new friends. And in the campaign, people have been incredibly supportive, amazingly. I mean, Sarah Olney, my MP, for one, Steve Mallon, who's the joint signatory on this open letter, which was sent yesterday to Sajid Javid. They've been fantastic.
And what about other people who've been through what you've been through? Because through a Papyrus charity, we've spoken quite a bit to, many of our viewers will know the three dads who've all lost three daughters to suicide, and they've got amazing strength and the ability to, you know, get up the next day and carry on, from talking to not only the others of the three dads, but others who have also been through that same loss that they've been through. Has that been of help to you as well? It
has, yeah, it has been of help. Absolutely, it's been of help.
And that's something I know that Papyrus are really involved in as well, isn't it? And as you say, being really honest and open about asking those questions and trying to find the answers.
That's right, and it's bringing together those people who have lived experience of suicide and sharing stories to try and ensure that no other families go through that heartbreaking loss.
The Department of Health say they are listening, they are engaging, they recognise the significance of this, and that they're investing £57 million in suicide prevention through a long-term plan. And they say that NICE guidelines advise staff not to use risk assessment tools to predict suicide, but just say they're helpful in developing a plan. So they are engaging with this.
Well, they are, but a part of the problem is that these national guidelines are not being put into practice where it matters, which is the interface between the counsellor and the client. And so one of the key things that this open letter is asking Sajid Javid to do is to make sure that those national guidelines are enforced. And let me give you an example of that. NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, have been saying for a long, long time that suicide assessment tools should not be used to predict suicide. Yet they are very commonly used to predict suicide. And one of the reasons why they advise, NICE advise people not to use those tools for predicting suicide is that they are very, very bad at predicting suicide. They are wrong over 95% of the time, and yet they are still being used to predict suicide. So we want Sajid Javid to enforce those national guidelines, and we also want him to include a thorough review of suicide risk assessments in the new strategy review that he's just announced, strategy into national suicide prevention.
Let's hope that strategy has a big impact, and I'm sure your contribution is invaluable. Thank you, Philip, and thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you for speaking so passionately about it.
There's just one last thing I'd like to say, which is that I'm asking for a meeting with Sajid Javid because I think he doesn't completely understand some of the root causes of the problem. And so I very much look forward to talking to him about that.
You'd like to sit down face to face?
I would like to do that.
Let us know what happens with that. And
Certainly.
really nice to speak to you both this morning. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And we should say as well that if you've been affected by anything you've just heard from Philip and Lisa that we've talked about in that discussion, the BBC Action Line, there's a homepage, it's got contact details for a wide range of organisations which can offer help and support, like Papyrus. Go to bbc.co.uk/action line and all the information is there for you.